1970s. While it has not exactly flung open the windows, nevertheless was and continues to be a cry for fresh air, which must not be ignored or pushed aside just because too much of it is seen to be irrational. Young people had come to realize that something is wrong in our relationship with nature, that matter is not just raw material for us to shape at will, but that the earth has a dignity of its own and that we must follow its directives. If something is wrong in our relationship with reality, then we must all reflect seriously on the whole situation, and we are all prompted to question the very foundations of our culture. Allow me to dwell a little longer on this point. The importance of ecology is no longer disputed. We must listen to the language of nature, and we must answer accordingly. Yet I would like to underline a point that seems to me to be neglected today as in the past. There's also an ecology of man. Man, too, has a nature that he must respect and that he cannot manipulate at will. Man is not merely self-creating freedom. Man does not create himself. He is intellect and will, but he is also nature. And his will is rightly ordered if he respects his nature, listens to it, and accepts himself for who he is, as one who did not create himself. In this way, and in no other, is true human freedom fulfilled. That's what I learned in the church. True freedom is to live in accordance with the reality of who we are. Jesus Christ himself says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I speak to high schools all the time, and this is a question I got from one of them. I have a big pack of 3x5 cards from the students at the high school. If I feel attracted to the same sex, doesn't mean I'm gay. The world says to that person, yes, it does. Because your feelings are more reliable to you than what your body says. And there are so many kids who go through high school. I think it's 16% of high school boys have an experience with another boy. But only a small percentage, when they're adolescent, only a small percentage of them have an intractability in their attractions to the same sex. But the world today says the way you feel is really who you are. And as soon as you have this feeling for another member of the same sex, you're suddenly something other than straight. And so we have to really, I was able to say to whoever that kid was there, no, you are a man just like any other man who's ever lived. This is from the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. Faced with theories that consider gender identity as merely the cultural and social product of an interaction between the community and the individual, independent of personal sexual identity, without any reference to the true meaning of sexuality, the Church does not tire of repeating her teaching. Everyone, man and woman, should acknowledge and accept his sexual identity. The truth is, for all of our students, all of our children, all the friends that we have who live with same-sex attraction, the truth is they are relying on a lie about the human person, which has been fostered through society. And the only way to peace for them is to accept the truth of their spiritual, well, here, let's continue. Physical, moral, and spiritual difference and complementarities are oriented towards the goods of marriage and the flourishing of family life. It goes on to speak about how fundamental the complementarity of the two sexes are, and we've lost that. So, one thing I want to talk about here now is some of the challenges that I've encountered when I speak to high school students about issues concerning homosexuality. Their big issue is fairness and justice. St. John Paul II said this: the sensitivity of young people profoundly affects their perceiving of the values of justice, nonviolence, and peace. Their hearts are disposed to fellowship, friendship, and solidarity. And then this next section, this is what we're dealing with today. They are greatly moved by causes that relate to the quality of life and the conservation of nature. They want everybody to be happy, right? This is why they support same-sex marriage. And then this last line is very apt as well. But they are troubled by anxiety, deceptions, anguishes, and fears of the world, as well as by the temptations that come with their state. I want to talk about a video by a fellow Macklemore. Have you ever heard of this? Sing Love by Macklemore? Well, your kids have, all right? This is 142 million views. This was very instrumental in transforming young people's views on same-sex marriage. And I want you to see what our kids, your kids, are seeing. All right? It begins with the birth of the Macklemore's uncle. All right? There he is. And then he grows up. He's playing, bikes. He's playing with his dad. Then he's in high school, playing football. But here he's in anguish. I know that anguish from high school when I didn't know what to do with these attractions to the same sex. Here he is. He's at a dance. Okay? Everybody's happy. But then he notices everyone's paired off, but not him. He's sad. He's in pain. Such was the case with me. Then he looks at the screen longingly. What are you going to do about my pain? And then it brings in echoes of the civil rights movement. Shows the burning of a cross, right? And then this line here is connected with religion brings wars. And once again we have civil rights, equating the rights for same-sex marriage with the battle for civil rights. This line here, live on, be yourself. Well, he's decided to embrace how he feels. He's coming home to introduce his partner, or his friend, as far as they know, to his parents. And if you notice, she's starting to cross herself. The Catholic Church is indicted in this video. But then the two say that we're together. And then in disgust, she wipes her face with a napkin and throws it on the floor. Once again, we juxtapose that with the fight for civil rights. And then this line, it's pretty clear what we should, if you're a sane person, you should support same-sex marriage. And now instead of Martin Luther King, we see the rainbow flag. And here we see them jumping into a pond. It's the same love. Now here, just lest you forget that there's tyranny. Somehow somebody walks by and says something abusive to them. But then here, they're back in their apartment, lucky man, right? Now they're at the beach, they propose, and there, finally, it's all the same love, our children are told. And then they're at a party, and he's dancing. Comes back a full arc to the beginning. Unless we forget it, we see a picture of that opening scene. Then there's joy, and then we fast forward to the end of age. They've been together a long time, at each other's side. It's clearly a death. Why don't we just support it? This is what this video says. And then here you see the rings hand in hand. It says, same love, support marriage equality. Our kids have been propagandized to believe that this is good, right? But in this, and I guarantee your kids have seen it. But in the video itself is evidence that it's not the same love. The two men can never have a child. This is why it's not the same love. It never can be the same love. And I show this to kids, and it really opens their minds. I say to them, I said, you can be open-minded, but as G.K. Chesterton said, don't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. We cannot say that it's the same love. It's impossible for it to be the same love. The sacrifice that they had as a mother and father comes back to Schoolhouse Rock. 3 is a magic number. There's a baby. The other, same-sex marriage is always and forever lifeless. It's not that there can't be love there. I was with a guy for a year. There was a lot of love there, but it's not the same sort of love. The other issue is that troubles kids is fairness and loneliness. I spoke at the National Catholic Singles Conference. And one thing I tell students that are concerned about that, I say there are far more men and women who are attracted to the opposite sex, who desire to be married, who will be single, than there are people with same-sex attraction on the planet. How many of you know people who are in their 40s or 50s who are single and long to be married? But God has ordained for them, through His divine providence, which is difficult, that God's path for them is going to be the single life. The people I hang out with are single. They don't have any same-sex attraction. But 4 of us are planning a trip to Europe this summer. We figured out how fulfilling a single life can be, and I'm not somehow unique in that because I live a same-sex attraction. And of course, they want to talk about fairness, and I say, well, is that fair? Is the cross fair? God did not talk about fairness. And this is, for me, the Catechism says, take up your cross daily and follow him. This is my example now in the difficult times of loneliness that I feel. I also like to talk about fairness in the children issue. I love this picture. These are people that were over 100 years old. They got married in China. Now, obviously, they can't have kids, right? And people say, well, you're going to let this 100-year-old couple from China get married, but you're not going to let 2 people who are single. And I like this picture. This is, some fancy sports car there. This is an old pickup truck, right? And here we have a grandmother at her granddaughter's wedding, and here we have a man who thinks she's a woman now, and quite beautiful as a pretend woman. Well, this sports car is made of carbon fiber and diamonds. It's $2 million. It's about this big. It will never, ever be a sports car. It will never go down the road. She will never, ever be a woman, no matter how much she looks like a woman. This grandmother, she cannot have kids now, but the fruit of her potentiality as a mom is there in her granddaughter. And this, I don't like to equate a grandmother with an old rundown Model T or whatever it is, but this is and always has been a truck. All right? We don't think about these sorts of things in reality. This is another argument, the born this way argument. There is no scientific evidence at all, though they have tried as much as they want. But even if that's the case, the way we're born does not determine our moral behavior. And then some people might say, oh, Dan, well, your first attractions, you were 6 years old. And they say, well, doesn't that mean you're born gay? And I asked them, I said, well, who remembers ever not speaking English? We weren't born speaking English, but it seems like we were. All of the evidence suggests, the Catechism says itself, that same-sex attraction, homosexuality has a psychological genesis. And I can see that in my life. I can look back on my life and see where it came from wounds in my childhood. Then there's the bacon wrapped shrimp problem, which I've seen on Facebook. There's when same-sex marriage was going about, and your kids saw this on Facebook, so you oppose gay rights because of the Bible? Well, you better outlaw shrimp cocktails, cursing, women's jeans, arrogance, lying, bacon. Kids are convinced by this sort of thing. But this is, I have come to realize that the beauty of God's word. King David said this, deal bountifully with thy servant that I may live and observe thy word. Open my eyes that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law. The answer here to the bacon wrapped shrimp problem, which I like to tell kids, is goat's milk. Which is, I'd like to come up with a more absurd commandment to them. There's a commandment in Exodus, the first of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. And then you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Where does that come from? It's so absurd. Well, St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that the reason God commanded Israel not to do that is because they did that in Egypt. These commandments were done there. This is the key here. Hosea, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Those strange commandments of God are there because God pulled them out of Egypt. If it talks about shellfish, that was the pagans did that. And there's also symbolic things. The eagle was forbidden for Israel to eat. Well, St. Thomas Aquinas says because the eagle represented pride. So you will not eat the eagle because we shall not be pride. We need to be humble before God. The cormorant was forbidden for Israel to eat. Well, that was a sign for the rabbis. the cormorant dove deep into the ocean. And for the rabbis from the very beginning, that was a sign of diving into the lusts of the pleasures of the flesh. All of these commandments were done by God because he loves us. And to flippantly say that it's just an arbitrary commandment of God does injury to God's love for us. The arguments from fashion, again, St. Aquinas rescues us because the Gentiles in their religious rites use garments of this sort. That's why God commanded them not to do that. And then there's the gay penguins argument. You might have heard about this. Homosexuality exists in nature. This showed up on my Facebook feed all the time. Homosexuality shows up in 450 species. Now it's 1,500 species. Homophobia is found in only one. Which one seems unnatural now? Well, my answer to this is, well, what would political debates be like if they were guided by what's natural in the animal kingdom? And if you read, I feel inappropriate saying this in church. I'll just read that. When I was a Protestant, the sanctuary was not a sacred space. I usually do this in the parish hall. But we've all been seeing the chimpanzees, they throw feces at each other. That's what's natural for an animal. We don't look as human beings to what happens in the animal kingdom for what's appropriate for us. Well, we have to be wise as serpents, gentle as doves. To many students, we have to be sensitive to this. To many students, it feels like the church is unfocused on all things gay, even if it isn't true. So when I talk about chastity, I talk about everything else as much as I can. So for example, would you call a man living with your sister uncle? No. How would you respond to your brother if he started living with a woman? Is this good for him or for her? If not, then why? If so, why? The church is opposed to divorce. Why? Why is the church opposed to contraception? And of course, this all comes back to what I was talking about, the NBA rule book, right? It's because the gift of sexuality is such a wonderful gift. But our kids don't understand that. So if they ever ask you about, well, why are you so focused on gay marriage? We'll say, it's not just that. It's all these other things too. And then I think this is so valuable in sharing my own story. I think, why, Dan, would you ever choose supposedly the hard, more difficult path? And I don't know if you've ever seen this YouTube video, but there's a YouTube video that says this is how Lord of the Rings should end. And it's a little 5-minute clip that when they're confronted with the problem with the ring, what do? We got to get to Mount Doom. Well, let's just call the Eagles, and we're going to pick you up and drop it into Mount Doom. End of the story. But then I say, that's not any story at all. That's no story. The story of man's existence is one of striving against our passions, and I want to be involved in that sort of a story. And then I like to think, the excitement. Why do we like these movies? Because we're drawn to these challenges. Weak against the strong, good versus evil. Doing the impossible, sports movies. Why do they love them? Because it seems almost impossible. And then we achieve it, because we're made for great stuff. Stories of perseverance and forbearance. And then, I'm a big Lord of the Rings guy, and this moment when Gandalf gives his life on behalf of the rest of the fellowship, well, that's the calling of Christ. Everybody knows that in Star Wars when Obi-Wan, sacrifices himself. Why do we love these movies? Because we're called to it. I'm sort of a nerd, you can tell. But here is Spock offering his life up on behalf of those he loves. And then I love the call of, why are we so inspired by Gandhi? Why are we so inspired by Martin Luther King? And I find this picture has always moved me greatly. The March in Selma, where these African-American men say, I'm a man, and I compare that to a gay pride parade. And I say, my brothers and sisters who are marching those gay pride parades have forgotten what it means to be a man. And the church needs to help them and save them. And then I think of the saints. These are three of my favorites. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Gianna, St. John Paul II, especially him. I'm so inspired by him, his battle for Parkinson's, St. Paul Benedict said, "We are not made for a life of ease. I don't want to be sitting in a couch my whole life. I want to go to the very end, and I want to do what God has called me to do. And it's too easy." Pope Francis said, the reason he doesn't like same-sex marriage, it's too easy. Two guys, they get along, they understand each other. Marriage is difficult because of the beauty and differences of men and women. I'll tell you, my mom and dad, I'm amazed they're married for 55, 60 years. It's a wonder. It's a miracle of God. But it's also perseverance on their part. But that difference has helped them in their own journey in sanctity. For me, what I need for my journey in sanctity is loneliness. I have realized God has allowed that in my life for my good. Because I think I would be a miserable, selfish person if I could go home every night to a family and my dog and everything. And God in His wisdom knows what He wants, or what is best for me. And I love this. I'm going to close with this. And then we'll have some time for questions here. This is from Pope John Paul II at World Day of Peace. And this is to youth. The inevitable question is this: what is your idea of man? Among the inevitable questions that you must ask yourselves, the first and foremost is this: what is your idea of man? What to you makes up the dignity and the greatness of a human being? This is a question that you young people have to ask yourselves, but which you also put to the generation that has preceded you, to your parents, and to all those who at various levels have had the responsibility of caring for the goods and values of the world. That's you. That's your responsibility to the next generation. And I think the next generation, like my generation, has been so instrumental in the battle against abortion. This generation, their task is to reclaim this sexual reality, which Jesus himself, while he still walked among us, he said, "Have you not heard from the very beginning, male and female, he created them." That is what the world needs so desperately today. And that's the good news of the church. So I want to thank you for letting me come here. I had planned to stop a little bit earlier, but if those of you who need to go, I'm happy to answer some questions here for a little bit before we break. If any of you have some questions or thoughts or discussions or that sort of thing.
Well, I was going to say that when you're talking about the story of your life, kind of looking back, that reminds me of, are you familiar with Peter Kraft?
Yeah.
I think he has a book on suffering. I forget the exact title.
Yeah, Making Sense of Suffering.
Thank you. And anyways, you're familiar exactly what I'm talking about, because he says that your life, if you could look back on it, and you had to say, like, you had everything your way, it'd be, as a story goes, rather boring. Mm-hmm. But if you could talk about the struggles that you went through, it's quite a story. And so I thought that's exactly what reminded me of when you said that. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, the ultimate answer, the reason I came to the church is because of the question of suffering. My life was pretty difficult, and it made no sense to me why God would not answer my prayers. Why I prayed, can you bring a woman into my life? And he did. That's part of the movie. He brought a woman. I was suddenly attracted to her, and we were together for 1.5 years, and it didn't work out. And she rejected me, and I said, "Dear God, why? And I certainly had moments of a fetal position in my living room and many tears. But I'm telling you what, thanks be to God that came into my life, because I now know I'm not a resident of the earth. There's a great line in the Psalms that says, we're strangers in a strange land. I'm in a land, dry and weary land without water. The greatest gift we're going to ever receive from God is to realize that this is not home. But I love this great line from C.S. Lewis. He says, if you think of this world intended simply as a place for your happiness, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Think of it as a place of correction and training, and it's not half bad. And that's the way I live my life now. There's not a day that goes by that I don't long to leave the earth. Not in a macabre way. St. Paul himself said, to live is Christ, to die is gain. I am there with the to die is gain. I am ready to go. But I look forward to being here as long as God has me here. And I want to love other people. And then one of the things that people drives me nuts when they say, oh, you're going to live this lonely life. Well, I say, you know what? I think part of my vocation in life is to be in a retirement home when I'm 80, showing other people who just lost their wife how to live as a single person. And the joy of the gospel is when you sit there and you say, you know what? God has mapped out my life for a purpose and accepting it. And nothing, no suffering that God brings in our lives, if we really saw our lives and God's plan for our lives, we would say, thank God for that. I thank God that He let me be so lonely and live with attractions to the same sex, because I know He did it for the good of my soul. And that's the problem, that the world with suffering, they say the answer to the suffering you have is same-sex marriage. Sorry. The cross. That's the answer. That's the path to peace and fulfillment. So I scoff. I scoff at that. Sorry, I'm getting all excited. Yes?
Just so you know, ABC Family is changing their name to Freeform.
Oh?
There's no more ABC Family.
Well, they must have found a legal Freeform. Well, that's pretty apt. ABC Family is changing their name to Freeform, and that's how we view the family, I think, any way you want. Any other questions? How about you in the white coat?
We're foster parents, and I struggle with kids coming to the house and say that they have same-sex attraction, especially when they might be sleeping in the room with a girl. What would you recommend, or how, like, I struggled with it, I've had it in my home, and it's really difficult when I believe it's a choice, and it was really difficult.
Yeah. So you have some friends of your foster kids, or do you have the foster
children.
The foster kids, I see. The foster kids come in and they say that they'll probably say gay or lesbian or bisexual, whatever. Well, first off, you mentioned that I think it's a choice. What we do is a choice. I certainly did not choose to be attracted to the same sex. I do realize that in my life, I did things that made it more settled. You know, I became addicted to pornography, and I fed that. But that's a difficult thing with foster kids. This is your house, but they're not your kids yet. So there's this you haven't adopted them yet. I think the way I would view that is God has brought that person into your life that you might plant seeds into their life and say, you know what, the world would say this is who you are through your feelings, but ask some questions. Well, why do you think that? And then listen. The most important thing that a parent can do, a foster parent, if a child comes to you and says, I'm gay, I'm bisexual, the first thing is to always listen and listen and listen some more. See where they are. But I do think that this might be a chance for you to plant a seed of truth in their lives. Now, you have the right to say, if you're going to have sleepovers, if this is this someone that you have, it's like, and it comes back to what I said before. Let's compare this to, let's say this is your son bringing a girl over and they're going to share the night, right? You could say, all right, you tell me that you're attracted to girls, you bring this girl over, do you think you view her as a girlfriend, right? You say, no, that's not going to happen in our house, right? You have to set up those boundaries for your house. That's what I would counsel you there. But at the same time, what I needed growing up was healthy same-sex friendships. So you don't want to cut them off from a healthy friendship. But I think it would be a mistake to have a sleepover, because the sad thing is she could tempt the other girl into messing around. And that sometimes happens. So that's a difficult situation. But I think you're probably there to plant a seed of truth. But know that it's not going to be probably you that makes that true change happen. So, someone had a question, yes?
Yes, question, Dan. From your perspective, how do you see the church, has the church done a good enough job or not in communicating to the congregation the issue with same-sex marriage or same-sex attraction, and how do we deal with it as a community on a daily basis? How do you see that? Has the church dealt with that properly?
Well, I look at the whole, I'm writing a book right now about my conversion. And I look at, my life has basically followed along with the gay rights movement, which happened in 1969 in New York at the Stonewall riots. And I was born in 1970. And the amazing speed with which really this has happened is remarkable. And it shows to me that this is not merely the work of man. And if you think about the Catholic Church, what happened to the Catholic Church right before same-sex marriage? The sex abuse scandal, right? That's no coincidence. That's where we deal with principalities and powers. So what happened? In my opinion, the evil one went after the church to undermine our credibility, and then we were so afraid of speaking about it. But now, what do we have to lose? It's like after Roe v. Wade, right? It seems like it was the law of the land, but now we're pretty close to winning back truth and reality, and I think we can do the same here. I like to think about the most important way we can speak about this, though, is not through a political aspect of thinking about same-sex marriage. We got to think about the people in the pews.